So what I want to talk about in this video is what goes into building a website, the different components and aspects of having a website. And I don't just mean the actual website, but the hosting, the domain name, things like that. All right, so let's start from start at the basics. So what is a web page? A web page is a single document that is hosted on a web server, and I'm sure most of you, even if you don't know HTML or anything about building websites, you know what a web page is. It displays information by using a markup language, and the most common markup languages is HTML and XHTML. Using HTML, we can display text, images, and videos, and more. And we can get to a web page with this type of URL. We have the domain name, and then a slash, and then the name of the page, and of course HTML. Now, even if you're using XHTML, this is always going to be HTML, okay? Or in some cases, with some servers, it's actually just HTML. But you don't see much of that anymore. Alright, so what's a website? A website is just a collection of web pages. It's pretty much your space on the web. When you buy a hosting account, you have your domain, which gives you a reserved spot on the web. So a website is usually served from a single domain name. They're housed on web servers, and we can interconnect the web pages through a menu and through hyperlinks, and that will allow us to navigate around the website and go to different web pages. Alright, so domain names. Before we talk about domain names, we need to talk about what an IP address is. And I'm going to have a whole section dedicated to domain names and IP addresses, but we'll just go over it very briefly here. An IP address is a numeric string of numbers, and they identify a computer or a device on a network. Alright, and it doesn't have to be a computer. If you have a network and you have your, let's say, your tablet integrated with your network, that gets its own IP address. Alright, and the format, at least the IP version 4 format, which is the more common use. There's also IP version 6, but version 4 looks like this. We basically have these 4 sets of numbers, alright, and we have a dot separating each one. Alright, so this is a good example of an IP address. Now, if we didn't have domain names, then if we wanted to visit a website on a web server somewhere, we would have to type this into the URL, and you can imagine how difficult it would be to have to remember a string, an IP address string, for every website that you want to go to. Alright, so that's really the purpose of domain names. You can access servers on the internet with this, well, if it allows you to. But domain names, that's the reason that they were created. Like I said, they're human readable names, and they identify a server's IP address. For instance, we have eduonix.com. This is actually linked with an IP address like this. Alright, and domain names must use a top level domain, or a TPL, and that's basically just the extension on the end. .com, of course, is the most popular. We have .net, .org, and there's a whole bunch of them, ones that you've never even heard of, and we're going to go over that more in the domain name section. So web hosting it's separate from a domain name. A lot of people that don't have much experience with this kind of thing, they don't understand the difference. And a domain name you can buy usually for around between $10 and $20 per year. Okay, so a domain name is very cheap. Web hosting, there's a bunch of different kinds of web hosting, which we're going to get into later on. But web hosting is a little more expensive. Typically, you could get a shared web hosting account, which is the cheapest and most common type. You can get for maybe around $10 per month. Or you could, usually most companies will allow you to pay by the year. HostGator is one of the top web hosting companies out there, and that's what we'll be using during this series. All right, so HostGator offers shared hosting, dedicated servers, virtual private servers, and reseller accounts, and we're going to go into that what those mean later on. All right, so web hosting, basically the term just refers to the housing of a website on a web server. Okay, there are many types of web hosting services, and like I said, they really vary, and you could get a shared hosting account for around $7 per month, or you can go up to the hundreds or even thousands per month when you're dealing with powerful dedicated servers. All right, so a dedicated server is basically a machine that is dedicated to you. All right, so you pretty much own the space on a single machine. And of course, we'll go over this later in the course. All right, so the HTTP protocol, this you really don't need to know, especially if you're just starting out, but I figured I'd throw it in there anyways. So basically, web pages are accessed through a browser using a URL, which includes the domain name, it includes the HTTP, and the TLD. All right, so when you do this, web pages on that website are accessed through the HTTP protocol or through HTTP requests. So it'll go to a website and it'll have headers in it, and it'll either ask for something, or you can post to the server. All right, so when you submit a contact form, you're posting to the server using an HTTP post request. All right, now if you're just typing in a link and you're going to a website, that's a GET request. All right, pages communicate with this protocol to display content. You can optionally use HTTPS if you install an SSL certificate on your server. And I don't want you to get overwhelmed with all these abbreviations, but basically, if you have like an e-commerce website where you're having credit card transactions, you want to buy an SSL certificate, and you can get those. The prices really vary in those as well. You can get one for as cheap as $20 per year, or you could spend thousands, and they all have different levels of security and encryption. All right, but if you do have an e-commerce site or a site that exchanges private information, you should look into an SSL certificate. Alright, so styling pages with CSS. Alright, so CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And back in the day, back in the 90s, we would use HTML for styling, for colors, alignments, things like that. And now that's really looked down upon. Now you want to use CSS. It's just much more reliable and easier to read. It's just that's the standard. All right, so HTML can add very basic styling, as I said, colors, bold text, things like that. But even though you can do this through HTML, I pretty much just said this, you should use CSS for all website design. Yeah, so you can do things like colors, background images, shadows, borders, spacing, and much more. And we'll actually do a little bit with CSS later on in this course. Alright, so server-side scripts. HTML is used for markup or content, but it's not a programming language, it's a markup language. And the difference is that markup languages don't make calculations, they don't have conditionals, they don't have if statements or anything like that. It's just to display the content. So aside from displaying content, HTML doesn't do very much. If you want to have a dynamic website, let's say an e-commerce site or a social networking site, something where things are changing all the time, then you're going to use a server-side language. And one of the most popular server-side languages is PHP. Alright, and there's also Perl, ASP, Ruby. There's a whole bunch of them. But PHP is what I would recommend if you're just starting out. If you want to learn how to program with server-side scripting, I suggest PHP. And with these languages, you can access a database, for instance a MySQL database, and you can grab data and show it through your web page, and you can have users update data on a database. For instance, when you post a Facebook status post, that is actually going into a database somewhere, all right, and then it's coming from the database when it's displayed on the screen or through the browser. All right, so server-side scripts. So those are pretty much the main components of a website. Let's just do a quick recap. Websites are just collections of web pages, and websites are accessed using a domain name that's used to translate a machine's IP address. Websites need to be hosted on a web server. HTML allows browsers to display pages through the HTTP protocol. CSS is used to style the web page content. Server-side scripts can interact with the server and a database and allow dynamic websites like stores, e-commerce shops, and social networks. Alright, so that's pretty much everything that we went over. So that's pretty much the basics of web design, or I'm sorry, building a website. In this course, I'm not really showing you how to build a website in terms of HTML and CSS or other programming languages. We're just going over pretty much what's needed to be able to create a website. Alright, so in the next section we'll go over the different types of websites that we can build.